Johnny Carson was 8 minutes into his interview with Elvis Presley when he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Elvis's hands were shaking, not from nerves. Elvis had performed for millions. This was different, and Johnny, looking into those eyes that had captivated the world, saw something that terrified him. A man saying goodbye. What happened in the next 22 minutes would haunt Johnny Carson for the rest of his life. Because 6 months later, Elvis Presley was dead, and Johnny realized he'd been watching a legend's final farewell on live television. May 20th, 1977. Studio One in Burbank, California. The Tonight Show was preparing for what NBC was billing as a major television event. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, was making his first Tonight Show appearance in 3 years. The network had been promoting it for weeks. This wasn't just another celebrity interview. This was Elvis. The audience that night was electric with anticipation. People had lined up for hours just to get into the studio. Everyone wanted to see the king. Everyone wanted to witness Elvis Presley doing what he did best, captivating America. But backstage, something was happening that the audience couldn't see. Fred de Cordova, the show's longtime producer, stood near Elvis's dressing room with a look of deep concern on his face. He'd just seen Elvis arrive, and what he saw troubled him. Elvis had come in through the back entrance, flanked by members of the Memphis Mafia, his personal entourage. But this wasn't the confident, swaggering Elvis that Fred remembered. Fred knocked quietly on the dressing room door and stepped inside. Elvis was sitting in front of a mirror, his face pale and drawn despite the heavy makeup the crew had applied. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his collar. "Elvis," Fred said gently, "how are you feeling? You ready for this?" Elvis looked up, and for just a moment, Fred saw something in his eyes that looked like fear. But then Elvis smiled, that famous Elvis smile, and the moment passed. "I'm ready, Fred. Let's give them a show." But Fred de Cordova had been in television for 30 years. He knew when someone was putting on an act, and he knew that whatever Elvis was about to do on that stage, it wasn't going to be the show anyone expected. Johnny Carson was in his own dressing room, going over his notes for the interview. He'd interviewed Elvis twice before, in 1972 and 1974. Both times had been ratings gold. Elvis was charismatic, funny, and completely comfortable in front of the camera. Johnny had enjoyed those interviews immensely. But when Fred came to brief Johnny before the show, his tone was different. "Johnny, I need to talk to you about Elvis." Johnny looked up from his notes. "What's wrong?" "He's not well. I don't know what it is exactly, but something's off. He looks exhausted. His hands are shaking. I'm worried about him." Johnny set down his cards. "Does he want to cancel?" "No, he insists he's fine, but I wanted you to know, just in case things go sideways out there." Johnny nodded slowly. "I'll keep an eye on him. If he needs to cut it short, we'll cut it short." At 11:30 p.m., The Tonight Show began taping. Johnny delivered his opening monologue with his usual perfect timing, but his mind was elsewhere. He kept thinking about what Fred had said. Elvis wasn't well. "And now," Johnny said, his voice taking on a tone of genuine excitement, "we have a very special guest tonight. He's the king of rock and roll, a legend who needs no introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Elvis Presley." The studio audience erupted. The applause was deafening. The band launched into Hound Dog as Elvis walked through the curtain, and Johnny Carson's heart sank. The man walking toward him wasn't the Elvis Presley America remembered. Elvis had gained considerable weight. His face was puffy and swollen. His movements, once fluid and graceful, were now slow and careful. He was wearing one of his trademark jumpsuits, but it hung on him awkwardly, clearly tailored to hide his changed physique. But it was Elvis's eyes that struck Johnny the most. Those eyes that had smoldered with passion and confidence now looked tired, haunted, and infinitely sad. Elvis reached the desk and shook Johnny's hand. His grip was weak, and Johnny could feel the tremor running through Elvis's fingers. "Elvis, it's great to have you back," Johnny said, his voice warm and welcoming, giving no indication of the concern churning inside him. "It's great to be here, Johnny," Elvis replied. His voice, that iconic voice that had sung "Can't Help Falling in Love" and "Suspicious Minds," sounded strained and hoarse. They sat down, and Johnny launched into the interview with his practiced ease, asking Elvis about his upcoming tour, about his life in Memphis, about his daughter Lisa Marie. Elvis answered the questions, but there was something mechanical about his responses, as if he was going through motions he'd performed 1,000 times before. 8 minutes into the interview, Johnny asked a question he'd asked Elvis before, a question that always got a great response. Elvis, after all these years, after everything you've accomplished, what still excites you about performing? Elvis opened his mouth to answer, and then something happened. His hands, which had been resting on the armrests of his chair, began to shake. Not subtly, visibly. Elvis looked down at his hands as if they belonged to someone else, then quickly clasped them together in his lap to hide the tremors. Johnny saw it, the camera operators saw it, the audience saw it, but no one quite understood what they were seeing. Elvis tried to speak, but his voice caught. He cleared his throat and tried again. Johnny, He paused, and for a moment, the mask slipped completely. The performer disappeared, and what was left was just a man, tired and struggling and trying desperately to hold himself together. I used to love it all, Elvis finally said, his voice quiet now, almost confessional. The screaming crowds, the lights, the feeling of being on stage. But lately, Johnny, he trailed off, looking past Johnny, past the cameras, past the audience, to something only he could see. Lately, I'm just so tired, man. The audience didn't know how to respond. Was this part of the act? Was Elvis building to something? But Johnny Carson, with decades of experience reading people, knew this wasn't an act. This was real. Tired from the touring? Johnny asked gently, giving Elvis an out, a way to turn this into something lighter. But Elvis didn't take it. Instead, he looked directly at Johnny, and in that look was something raw and honest and heartbreaking. Tired from everything, Elvis said. Tired from being Elvis Presley. The studio fell silent. 20 million people watching at home fell silent, because the king of rock and roll, the man who'd always been larger than life, had just admitted to being human. And not just human, but fragile. Johnny leaned forward, his interviewer instincts telling him that something important was happening here, something that transcended entertainment. What do you mean by that? Johnny asked. Elvis took a shaky breath. His eyes were glistening now, though whether from emotion or medication or exhaustion, Johnny couldn't tell. You know, Johnny, when I was young, when I first started, all I wanted was to sing. That's all. I just wanted to make music that made people feel something. And for a while, it was perfect. It was everything I dreamed of. He paused, gathering himself. But then it became something else. It became Elvis Presley the brand, Elvis Presley the icon, Elvis Presley the king. And somewhere along the way, I lost Elvis Presley the person. Does that make sense? Johnny nodded, his own eyes showing empathy. It does. It makes perfect sense. I wake up every morning, Elvis continued, and I have to be Elvis. I have to look a certain way, act a certain way, perform a certain way. Everyone wants a piece of the king, but nobody asks about the man. The vulnerability in Elvis's voice was stunning. The audience sat transfixed. This wasn't the confident, swaggering Elvis they'd come to see. This was something nobody had ever seen before. Elvis Presley being completely, devastatingly honest. I'm surrounded by people all the time, Elvis said, but I've never felt more alone in my life. Johnny Carson, who'd maintained professional composure through thousands of interviews, found himself struggling to keep his own emotions in check. He'd interviewed presidents, he'd interviewed legends, but he'd never heard anyone speak with such naked honesty about the cost of fame. Elvis, Johnny said quietly, is there anyone you can talk to about this? Anyone who can help? Elvis let out a bitter laugh. Everyone around me tells me I'm fine. They tell me I'm Elvis Presley. I'm the king. I can do anything. But you know what, Johnny? The king is tired. The king wants to rest. The way he said those words sent a chill through Johnny Carson's body. Because in that moment, Johnny understood what he was really hearing. This wasn't just exhaustion. This was something deeper, something darker. This was a man who'd given up. During the commercial break, Elvis leaned over to Johnny, away from the microphones. What he whispered, Johnny would never share publicly, but those close to him said it was something that haunted Johnny for the rest of his life. I don't think I'm going to make it much longer, Johnny. I can feel it. Something's wrong, and I don't know how to fix it. When they came back from commercial, Johnny tried to steer the conversation to lighter topics, trying to give Elvis a reprieve from the emotional intensity. But the damage, if you could call it that, was done. Everyone watching had seen behind the curtain. They'd seen the king without his crown. Toward the end of the interview, Johnny asked if Elvis would sing something. Elvis nodded and slowly stood up. The band started playing Unchained Melody, one of Elvis's most beautiful songs. Elvis began to sing, and for a moment, a glimpse of the old Elvis appeared. His voice, despite its hoarseness, still carried that emotional power. But as the song progressed, something heartbreaking happened. Elvis's voice began to crack, not from emotion, but from physical exhaustion. He was fighting to hit notes that used to come effortlessly. The audience watched in silence as Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, struggled through his performance. Some people looked uncomfortable. Others had tears in their eyes. Everyone understood they were witnessing something profound and tragic. When the song ended, Elvis stood there for a moment, breathing heavily, his face flushed. The audience applauded, but it was a different kind of applause. It wasn't the wild, enthusiastic cheering Elvis was used to. It was respectful, gentle, almost reverent. It was the applause you give someone who's just shown tremendous courage. Elvis made his way back to the chair and sat down heavily. Johnny reached over and put his hand on Elvis's shoulder. "Thank you, Elvis," Johnny said, and in his voice was a depth of feeling that went beyond professional courtesy. "Thank you for being honest with us tonight." Elvis nodded, too exhausted to speak. As Elvis left the stage, Johnny Carson sat at his desk, unable to do his usual closing remarks. He just looked at the camera and said simply, "Ladies and gentlemen, Elvis Presley, good night." After the show, Johnny went to Elvis's dressing room. Elvis was sitting alone, still in his jumpsuit, staring at nothing. "Elvis," Johnny said, "I'm worried about you. Really worried. Will you let me help you? I can get you in touch with people who can." Elvis looked up at him with a sad smile. "I appreciate that, Johnny. I really do. But I don't think anyone can help me now. I've made my choices, and I'm living with them." "It's never too late to make different choices," Johnny insisted. "Maybe," Elvis said. "Maybe." But they both knew it was too late. Something in Elvis had already surrendered. 6 months later, on August 16th, 1977, Johnny Carson was preparing for that night's show when a production assistant burst into his office. "Johnny, turn on the news. Elvis is dead." Johnny stood there, remote in hand, watching the reports coming in from Memphis. Elvis Presley, age 42, found dead at Graceland, suspected heart attack. A nation in shock. But Johnny wasn't shocked. He'd seen it coming. He'd watched it happen in slow motion on his stage 6 months earlier. He'd looked into Elvis's eyes and seen a man who was already gone. That night, Johnny opened The Tonight Show with a tribute to Elvis. He showed clips from their previous interviews, including that final, heartbreaking appearance. But before showing it, Johnny said something that captured what everyone had witnessed that night. 6 months ago, Elvis Presley sat on this stage and did something incredibly brave. He stopped performing. He stopped being the king. And he showed us the man underneath all the fame and legend. He showed us someone who was hurting, who was struggling, who was human. And I think in his way, he was trying to tell us goodbye. Johnny's voice broke slightly. "I wish I'd understood that better at the time. I wish I'd done more. But I'll be forever grateful that Elvis trusted us enough to show us his truth, even when it was painful." The clips rolled, and America watched that May 20th interview with new eyes. They saw the trembling hands, the exhausted eyes, the moment when Elvis said, "I'm so tired, man." They understood now what they'd been witnessing, a legend's last public cry for help. In the years that followed, Johnny Carson rarely spoke publicly about that final interview with Elvis, but those close to him said it changed how he approached his work. He paid more attention to his guests, not just as performers, but as people. He looked for the moments when someone needed help, needed someone to see them, really see them. Ed McMahon once said, "After Elvis, Johnny understood that fame doesn't protect you from pain. Sometimes it makes the pain worse because you have to hide it from everyone." The final interview between Johnny Carson and Elvis Presley has become one of the most analyzed moments in television history. Mental health professionals point to it as a clear example of someone exhibiting signs of severe depression and substance dependency. Music historians see it as the moment when Elvis's long, slow decline became undeniable. But more than anything, it stands as a reminder that behind every legend, every icon, every king is just a person who can hurt, who can struggle, who can be overwhelmed by the weight of their own fame. Elvis Presley walked onto the Tonight Show stage on May 20th, 1977, and for 22 minutes, he stopped being the king. He became Elvis again, just Elvis, a 42-year-old man from Memphis who was tired and scared and trying to figure out how to keep going. Johnny Carson gave him the space to be that person. He didn't force Elvis to perform, didn't push him to be the king when the king was too tired to wear the crown. 6 months later, Elvis was gone, but that interview remains, a document of vulnerability, honesty, and the crushing weight of fame. The question Elvis never asked out loud during that interview was the one that haunted everyone who watched. Does anyone see me? The real me? And Johnny Carson, with tears in his eyes during his tribute show, answered for all of us. Yes, Elvis, we saw you, and we're sorry we didn't see you soon enough. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button. Share it with someone who needs to remember that fame and success don't protect us from pain, and that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is admit we're struggling. Drop a comment about what Elvis's legacy means to you, and ring that notification bell for more stories about the human moments behind Hollywood's biggest legends. Because sometimes the most important performances aren't about entertaining us. They're about showing us the truth, even when it hurts.